I just want to start by expressing my gratitude to the ranking member and to the chairman for having this hearing. It has been probably the best experience I've had in the United States Senate since I began about 18, 19 months ago, to find such bipartisan willingness to deal with issues of justice in our country. It's extraordinary from our meeting with Chairman Grassley yesterday to being able to sit with you today, Chairman, to see this bipartisan willingness to confront the wrongs in our country that surround criminal justice and a determination to do something about it.
Let me just interject before you go on. And we talked about this earlier. I was going to do a field hearing in Milwaukee on high levels of incarceration. We didn't do it on that subject because this is so complex, and it was difficult to design the hearing so it wouldn't be inflammatory.
Yes.
So again, I appreciate your working with me so we hold this first one here, but again, this will be first
Yes.
in a series. What we ended up doing instead is we held a hearing on school choice, which starts really at the beginning part of this time spectrum in terms of not providing a proper education, and it ends up leading to this end result in terms of prison. But again, I appreciate your willingness to work with me on this, and I'm hoping at some point in time we can move this discussion into different areas that this is pretty relevant. One of them certainly would be in Milwaukee.
No, I'm grateful. Again, I'm grateful to you. We've had countless now conversations about criminal justice reform, and your eagerness, willingness, sincere desire to do something about it has been really encouraging to me in my early months in the Senate. So I'm thankful for that and for this opportunity to be here today. It is a movement now in our country to do something about it. When you have a president of the United States willing to visit a prison, being the first person to do so, we see that is a part of our culture. As a Christian, it says in the Bible, Matthew 25, when I was hungry, you gave me something to eat. When I was thirsty, you gave me something to drink. When I was in prison, you came to visit me. This understanding that our criminal justice system is not about fear and retribution, but should be guided by principles of justice, fairness, and ultimately redemption. To me, that is the American way. But unfortunately, we've gone in a way that so far cuts against our common values and our ideals. This age of mass incarceration on a whole is violating our core principles in so many areas. To have us, as we proclaim to be the land of freedom and liberty, but to have 1 out of every 4 imprisoned people on the planet Earth here in the United States of America, even though we only have 4 to 5% of our population, it runs contrary to our core ideals. To do this at such a massive expense to the taxpayer, unnecessarily egregious expenditures, where we spend about $250 billion a year incarcerating human beings, many of whom do not need to be incarcerated at the lengths in which they are, runs against our values. When we see our infrastructure crumbling in this country, yet we have the resources between 1990 and 2005 to build a new prison in the United States every 10 days. It runs against our fiscal prudence and our values as a nation. When we see poor people being ground up into a system, but for the fact that they don't have the resources for their liberation, that we have a modern day debtor's prisons in our country that runs contrary to our common values. When we now are at a point in our country where we have literally almost 1 out of 3 Americans, between 75 and 100 million Americans, have an arrest record. If we were to go back to the revolutionary times and tell them that there was going to be a government in this land that would be seizing the liberty of almost 1 out of 3 people, we would definitely have sparked that revolutionary spirit. And now is the time that we need a revolution when it comes to issues of crime and punishment. Now, the chairman was very clear, and I think it's important to restate, that this is a narrow hearing about one specific aspect to begin a process of looking for reforms. But please know, if you look at just our Bureau of Prisons, our federal prison population has expanded 800% since 1980. The Bureau of Prisons now has almost 200,000 inmates, and it is 35 to 40% over in capacity. It employs nearly 40,000 people, and last year in fiscal 2014, the Bureau of Prisons enacted budget totaled an astonishing $6.9 billion. Just working on transportation and commuter rail, seeing the fraction of that we're debating over when we're spending this much. This Bureau of Prisons now is 25% of the Department of Justice discretionary budget. And in my very first meeting with then Attorney General Holder, he actually talked to me about the urgent crisis he faces, that the Bureau of Prisons is squeezing out his entire budget, taking money away from things that we should be investing in for homeland security, for our protection overall as a citizenry because of this massive explosion. The Bureau of Prisons is so large that it is absolutely critical that we in Congress, this committee, exercise our oversight to ensure that taxpayer dollars are being spent wisely, and especially in light of what many states are showing, that you can reduce your prison populations dramatically, saving taxpayer dollars and lowering crime at the same time. So make no mistake, as a mayor, I learned that you have to make sure that when a crime is committed, that there is a punishment and people get a proportional punishment. But I'm troubled by some of the practices that are obviously failing to live up to our common values and just do not make in any way economic sense as well. And so I'm grateful for this hearing. There are some areas which I think we really need to drill down that are in those small areas that we can make improvements now that can, Mr. Chairman, make a big difference. One of them is solitary confinement, known in the Bureau of Prisons as segregated housing units. It's a practice that many people, medical professionals, human rights activists, civil rights activists, indeed other countries consider torture because of its impact. Prolonged use of solitary confinement on an inmate often results in severe psychological harm. Justice Kennedy, in a recent Supreme Court decision, questioned the constitutionality of this punishment, saying the penal system has a solitary confinement regime that will bring you to the edge of madness, perhaps madness itself. The medical community confirms that reality. It is time that the federal government acts as a model to ending this practice of solitary confinement. Also, Congress gave the courts the authority to release prisoners early for extraordinary compelling reasons, known as compassionate release. The Bureau of Prisons has the ability to release prisoners now that are facing imminent death or serious incapacitation. The data is clear on this population. They are not a threat to our safety and our community, and they are costing taxpayers extraordinary amounts of money. This is a compassionate release program that is properly named and should be explored. And then Attorney General Holder issued guidelines to allow the Bureau of Prisons to expand the pool of applicants who may be considered for compassionate release. This is something we should look at. Finally, I hope that we can explore what programming the Bureau of Prisons provides to those that are the least of these in our society, those that are often marginalized. And I'm specifically talking about those who are suffering from mental health challenges and drug addictions. Right now, states across America are struggling to control, for example, a growing heroin epidemic. And many of these people are finding themselves addicted in a federal system that does not adequately treat them. The Bureau of Prisons must find a way to assist inmates who are struggling with addiction and with mental health. Again, I want to thank you, Chairman. This is a hearing that I've been very excited about. I want to thank our witnesses. I especially want to thank Charles Samuels, who has met with me personally, who we've had great conversations with. His tenure is actually coming to an end, but he is a dedicated public servant representing the administration, and I know they are committed to reforms and have a record of making some progress on these issues that I have outlined. Thank you.